Hey there, everyone. It's been a bit. There's been a lot of things happening. Some of it good, a lot of it bad. Doing my best to just kind of keep going. But we are doing our best to just keep moving. So I figured it is time for more story time because I have been naughty. So, chapter 19. Have you nothing to say? Renard asked. We have time. All sleep here. The walls are thick. They will not hear our swords. Yes, I think we have time. In Paladin's name, Renard, why? Huma could almost see the face despite the hood and the darkness. He could almost feel the bitterness as Renard spoke. When I lay dying of plague all those years ago, I pleaded with Paladin, with Mishakal, with all the gods of that house for release. They did nothing. I lingered, wasting away. My visage shocks many now. It would have horrified them even more had they seen it then. I had contracted the Scarlet Plague, you see. The Scarlet Plague, of all the forms unleashed over the years, the Scarlet Plague had been the worst. The knighthood had been forced to burn whole villages when the greatest healers could not keep the disease under control. The victims wasted away, but each day was agony, and many killed themselves long before the disease had the chance. The name came from the redness of the skin as the victim eventually burned up from the sickness. It was a frightening thing, still talked of in whispers. Then, when I was sure that the agony would finally kill me, I was visited, not by the gods that I had pleaded to, but by the one god willing to take away my pain, for a price. The point of the blade rose again. Morgion. Only he cared to answer my prayers, though I had never looked to him. He was willing to take my pain away from me, make me whole, if I would become his. It was no difficult decision, Huma. I accepted immediately and gladly. Huma prayed for something, Lord Oswald stirring, knights coming to investigate the darkness, something, but all remained quiet. How long had Renard planned? How long had he waited for this moment? Huma heard more than saw the blade coming at him. That other knight moved confidently in the dark, yet Huma managed again and again to counter each strike, though he knew that Renard's skill in personal combat was considered second to none, especially now when he faced a Huma who also fought within himself. Then, as suddenly as he had attacked, Renard ceased. He chuckled quietly. Very good. Much like your father. My father? They had worked their way farther from the doors, towards where the clerics stood when they offered ceremonies. Renard pulled back his hood, and even in the dark Huma could make out the pale, drawn skin. Father, oh yes. That was why I protected you, you know. The mark of Morgion, even on an unsuspecting person, is a sign that that one is not to be harmed by any who serve him. Huma remembered the words of the cultists in the ruins. They'd seen the mark and had argued about it. Scalaris had not known the reason for its existence. What a sentimental fool I am, Renard continued, for wanting to save my kin. Kin? Huma shook his head in growing horror. You are so very much like my brother was, Huma. Durak was his name. Durak, Lord of Eldor, a land overrun, soon after he and I joined the knighthood. Nothing remains of Eldor today save a few pitiful ruins, just as well. Unlike the Baxter domains, where Lord Oswald and Trake ruled jointly, I would have inherited nothing. As eldest son, your father inherited. Stop it! Huma swung violently at the man who had betrayed all that he'd believed in, a man who had once been a friend. Renard defended himself easily. After several moments, they parted again. I belonged to Morgion long before our father sent us as squires to Vingard Keep. From the first, I tried to protect Durak. He was family, after all. The others who followed Morgion might not understand that, so I planted within him the same invisible mark that protected you from them. It proved to be a futile gesture. Your father died in battle only a year after becoming a knight. He stayed back with a handful of others to block a passage through the eastern mountains of Hylo, the only passage that would allow the Queen's forces to attack from the rear. The rest of us rode to warn the main army. There was nothing I could do. Ironic, is it not? I wanted to tell him the truth about me at that last moment, but of course I could not. Little did I know that at that time he had left a wife and son. Huma quivered, part of him yearning to hear the story, part of him repulsed. You must ask Lord Oswald about Duroc sometime, when you meet him on the other side. Renard charged Huma, catching the anguished knight off guard. They struggled together, and Huma found himself staring into the face half-twisted by madness. Gone was the emotionless facade that he had always wondered about, the mask behind which Renard had hidden his treachery. Huma succeeded in pushing the other knight away. What was her name, nephew? Karina? I saw her only once, years later, when I finally located the village that he had frequented before his death. She was a beautiful woman, wheat-colored hair, elfin face, slim, a woman full of life. I thought of wooing her, but then I saw you, Duroc, all over again, though only a lad, and knew that she would shun the horror that I was. I was a fool to think that anything other than my promise to my true lord... to think of anything other than my promise to my true lord. Renard's sword cleaved the air as it came down at Huma. The younger knight rolled to the side and into a squatting position. You killed her, didn't you? Huma's voice was cold and lifeless as he finally relived the days of his mother's fatal illness, which had seemed to come from nowhere. You should thank me. I thought of you. I wanted you to be the knight Duroc should have been. I believed I could keep you unaware of the truth. Renard smiled obscenely. The dream. I had a dream about your foul god. I thought I might draw you to my side, make you a comrade, and spare us this. What by the platinum dragon goes on in here? Both combatants froze as light streamed into the room. Bennett stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his fellows from the Order of the Sword. A quick glance showed Renard's realization of his mistake. Bennett must have retired on his own, or at least have departed, and Renard had had no chance to treat him as he had treated all of those unsuspecting others. Renard? Huma? Whatever his faults, the son of the late Grand Master was not slow. He took in the scene, saw the tattered cloak and hood that covered Renard's armor, and knew what the knight represented. Bennett pulled out his sword and pointed at the traitor. I want him! How quickly the veneer of dignity vanishes in the face of petty emotions, Renard commented wryly. Without another word, he took a savage swing at Huma, who dodged, and then Renard bolted over the pews. He has nowhere to go! Bennett's resemblance to a bird of prey was even more obvious now. His eyes were wide and burned intensely, yet they caught every movement, studied all angles. His movements were fluid, calculated. Bennett was a hawk about to dive upon its prey. He stalked Renard now, but Renard had stepped into the shadows of the wall and slid through. Huma reached the walls before the others and felt the spot. He did not think that Renard had used sorcery to get away, as mages had once done. No, it might... Yes! Huma's fingers found a slight indentation, and the wall suddenly gaped open to swallow him. Behind him, he could hear Bennett shouting for the other two to follow. Then the wall closed once more. Huma had no time to wait for them. Where did Renard hope to go? The Elder Knight's rapid footsteps were barely audible, moving upstairs. What did Renard hope to find up there? This was not an ancient hidden stairway as Huma had first suspected. He passed 2 windows on his way up to the next level. The stairway ended at a trapdoor in the ceiling. Cautiously, he reached up and, with his blade ready in his other hand, pushed it open. The wind and rain rushed to meet him. The attack he expected did not occur. Footsteps behind him alerted him to the presence of Bennett and his 2 companions. Huma did not want them to be the ones to face Renard. That was reserved for himself. Slowly, Huma stepped up and out into the rain. The roof was empty. There was no place to hide and no place to flee to. The knight walked to the nearest ledge and peered over. Knights were beginning to gather now. Bennett had sounded the alert. The first of Bennett's 2 companions lifted himself out onto the roof. Where is he? Did you catch him? Huma shook his head. Where was Renard? The newcomers also combed the roof, but they could not discover a trace. Renard had simply vanished. Bennett refused to believe this. The knight searched all the nearby buildings, and, when that failed to turn up anything, searched the rest of the keep as well. Renard's belongings were gathered and inspected, but they offered few clues. The clerics had rushed to Lord Oswald's side the moment they learned of the attack. To their amazement, he appeared to be recovering. As one cleric explained to Huma, Bennett and the others who had assembled, Lord Oswald's body was throwing off the effects of the dose that Renard had administered earlier. Thus, the assassin hoped to effect a second dose before the High Warrior had recovered.
You are going to be a nuisance all night. No.
Somebody cheated herself out of being able to go to bed early tonight because she ate a hole in my pants. As the nights dispersed, some continued to search for the traitor, some to their various duties. Huma felt a hand on his shoulder. He started at first, his thought that Renard had come to finish him off. The figure behind him spoke. "It's Bennett." Huma turned slowly around, and the two faced one another. Oswald's nephew seemed to be fighting several emotions all at once, for his face registered traces of embarrassment, anger, and confusion. At last he reached out a hand. "My gratitude for all that you've done." Uncertain as to how to react, Huma simply took the hand in his own and shook it. "I failed to capture your father's killer." Bennett forced his face into immobility. Huma knew that the other knight was very uncomfortable. "You unmasked him. You saved my uncle. Even fought that pale traitor to a standstill. Something I could never have done." The hawk-faced knight saluted briefly and departed. Huma watched him disappear, a brief smile playing on his lips before he, too, turned and left, hoping to find some trace of Renard. It came as no surprise 2 days later that Lord Oswald became the new Grand Master. He'd remained isolated before that decision, with only the council members speaking with him. All possible opposition by Bennett had vanished. In fact, the new Grand Master's nephew was petitioning to step up to the Order of the Rose. There was every likelihood that he would be recommended. It was also likely that he would be wearing the trappings of High Warrior himself before long. Huma struggled to get through those 2 days. When he was at last granted an audience with Lord Oswald, Huma shook visibly. To him, the Grand Master was a figure almost as revered as Paladin, for he was, after all, the living symbol of the Triumvirate's desires. As Huma knelt in supplication, an odd sound reached his ears, and he dared to look up. Flanked by an impressive honor guard consisting of veterans from all 3 orders, the Grand Master was sitting on his throne and chuckling. "Get up, Huma. You don't have to stand on ceremony with me, not now." Huma rose and came closer. "Grand Master, if you must be formal, make it Lord Oswald. I do not have the pretensions of my brother. Not yet." "Lord Oswald, before I start, tell me of Durak of Eldor." "Durak? I've known 2 or 3. Eldor, I'm not sure." "Please. You know which one. Renard's brother, my father." The new Grand Master stared open-mouthed. "Father? Durak? Then Renard—" "My uncle." Huma forced the unsavory word from his mouth. "Oh, Paladin." Lord Oswald's voice was little more than a whisper. "Huma, I am sorry." "Sir, my father?" The Grand Master wiped something from his eye. "I'm sorry, Huma. I wish I could tell you everything, but I honestly don't remember much. Durak was a good knight, although a little overenthusiastic. He was brilliant, almost natural fighter, picking up skills as easily as I might pick up a knife. I remember that he spent much of his time west, but I never knew it was because he had a family. I do remember, though," Oswald said, rubbing his chin, "him shouting to us as we left him, and the others to hold the pass. Now I realize what he meant. When he had said, 'Watch over them,' I thought he meant the men. Oh, what a fool. He meant his family, and only Renard even really knew." There was little more the Grand Master could add, which disappointed Huma, though he did not show it. It was Oswald who broke the uneasy silence by saying, "You have my permission to start out for Orgoth and your mountains. How many knights will you need to accompany you?" "None." "None?" The Grand Master leaned forwards, his hands gripping the throne tightly. "As you yourself have mentioned, this is a matter of utmost importance. I want to ensure your success. Paladin has seen fit to give us this chance, but I will not let you take unnecessary risks." What Paladin seeks from me must be from me alone, Huma replied. I feel that now. I cannot explain how I know. It simply feels right. Oswald sighed and leaned back. You say that with great conviction. My head tells me that you are wrong, but my heart listens to you. I think in this matter I will go with my heart, for that is where belief begins. Thank you, my lord. Lord Oswald stood. Huma followed suit. The Grand Master clasped Huma on the shoulders. Regardless of your birth and who your parents were, I will always consider you my son. They held one another briefly, then Oswald broke away. Go on. Get out before I become even more a sentimental fool than I am. Few knights were around the courtyard when Huma chose to leave. He wanted it that way. It would make the departure easier, at least for him. A part of him felt as if he were running out, that he should remain in Vingard Keep until Renard was found and punished. Yet Huma no longer wanted any part of the other's capture. He'd known the Gaunt Knight for far too long, simply to forget all those past times, when the two had been friends. One figure he did note, Bennett, standing on the parapet and scanning the keep. The Grand Master's nephew was still searching for his father's murderer. The search through Renard's belongings had uncovered ancient plans for the keep that had been thought lost forever. They included 2 passages within the temple that not even the clerics knew about. The dour Bennett turned from gazing out at the land surrounding Vingard and noted Huma. He nodded, slowly, and then turned away. That was all. Huma's path took him through another half-dead village. He'd been riding for an hour. Twice, Huma had met patrolling knights, and each time he had brought them up to date on the futile search going on in Vingard Keep for the traitorous Renard. The inhabitants of this particular village eyed the lone knight differently than those Huma had passed in other places. There was a tension in their very movements, a great sense of fear, as if they expected to see the Dragon Queen herself swoop out of the sky at any moment. Slowly, they began to mill about Huma and his horse. The war horse slowed nervously, its nostrils flaring as it stared at possible enemies. Huma pulled tight on the reins, re-exerting mastery of the beast. He did not want to have the lives of innocent common folk on his hands. It soon proved impossible for the horse to proceed, so concentrated had the small crowd become. The villagers enveloped animal and rider with a wave of human fear. Huma began picking up muttered questions dealing with the events in the keep. A grimy, bony claw touched his right leg. A rasping voice asked, "Is it true? Has the Grand Master been murdered? Are we no longer safe?" "I heard the council wants to surrender," cried out a voice that the knight could not locate. The last statement increased the anxiety of the villagers. They crowded even closer, oblivious to the danger that they faced from the hooves of the trained steed. Huma tried to wave them back. I am getting messages. They are interrupting story time. We are turning off the messages. There we go. That last statement increased the anxiety of the villagers. They crowded even closer, oblivious to the danger they faced from the hooves of the trained steed. Huma tried to wave them back. "Stand aside! Let me through! If you don't, the horse might hurt you!" "He's fleeing!" cried the same voice. "The knights are lost! We're all lost!" shrilled an old woman. She fainted and was lost in the press of bodies. "You can't leave us! You're trying to save your own skin! Get back!" Faces filled with anger and confusion moved through Huma's vision. Hands clawed at him. The horse spooked and reared. Those closest to the animal's front came to their senses and turned to escape, but those who had been behind them continued to move forward. An elderly man fell. The knight succeeded in calming his mount, and then sought to clear a path so that he could help the old man. "He's betrayed us all! He struck the elder down! Take him!" Ragged, gaunt figures surged on Huma. He pulled out his sword and threatened them with it. The villagers backed away, but were by no means ready to give up, not when they feared the Knights of Salami and were abandoning them to the tenderness of the Dragon Queen. This time, Huma spotted the instigator, a figure clad in the garments of a simple farmer standing off to the side. The man made no move to run when he realized that he had been seen. Instead, he drew a broadsword and revealed once more the face of evil. Huma directed the horse through the crowd. forcing people back with his sword and thanking Paladin that no one had yet dared him to strike. He reined the steed to a stop less than 6 feet from the figure. Bennett still thinks you might be in the keep. Renard smiled briefly. I was, until Lord Oswald's appointment became official. Then I came here to give them the news. Huma leapt off his mount, never taking his eyes from his uncle, nor sheathing the sword. To put fear in their hearts, you mean? To break you down trust, to make us fight among ourselves. It is my calling, but not just these. Villages all over this area. I've not slept since yesterday. They finally found your secret passages. I know. I left the maps on purpose. I had no more need of them. This is insane, Uncle. Uncle, a word I never thought you would use. Yes, it is insane. The whole world is insane. I strive to make it less so. Renard pointed at the villagers, speaking quietly enough that they would not hear him. The fear will spread. They will march on the keep in their desperation, and the knighthood will be forced to drive them away, with at least some loss of life, I believe. The great knights of Salania will suffer both the notoriety of their actions and a terrible blow to their morale. I need not go on. This has all been planned. Of course. I could have killed the entire council, but that only would have strengthened the knighthood's resolve. That is why I've traveled to the near lands in disguise, stirring the pot. Renard straightened, and the sword swung slowly back and forth. The only remaining duty is you, Huma. I knew you would choose this route. I cannot allow you to return to this cavern. It may be madness on your part, but I think that it is not. I cannot risk being wrong about something like that. His sword came up swinging, and Huma immediately blocked the thrust. The villagers stepped away as the two knights fought, but the people's horribly expectant looks showed Huma that they were waiting to see one of the knights die, so completely had they become Renard's pawns. The gaunt knight swung and gave Huma an opening. Renard's skill allowed him to parry much of the blow, but Huma's blade still slipped under and struck a glancing blow on the other's right side. The blade clanged off solid surface beneath Renard's tunic, and a cunning smile flashed briefly across the pale knight's features. Beneath the cloth, he still wore his armor. Their blades clashed time and time again as they struggled through the rain-soaked village. The human wall that surrounded them bent and twisted, but never revealed a gap. Huma wondered what would happen to him even if he did defeat Renard. The villagers might very well fall on him. Very good, hissed Renard. I trained you well. Well enough. Huma said no more. He knew that he needed to save every ounce of his strength, for Renard was living off of his madness and fighting with daunting power and ferocity. Huma slipped in the mud just as Renard's blade flashed past his throat. The traitor fell forwards, and Huma caught him sharply in the leg. Renard did not scream, though. His leg was awash with blood almost immediately. He hobbled away from Huma. They turned to face each other once again. Huma was on the verge of exhaustion, while Renard was becoming faint from the terrible wound across the front of his right leg. Huma's blade had just missed the muscles and tendons that would have cost Renard the limb. Surrender, Renard. You will be treated fairly, I swear it. The pale knight looked more drawn than normal. I think not. A traitor such as myself, who has killed one grandmaster and almost another, could hardly expect fair treatment from the knighthood.
Sit in your chair. Go sit in your chair. Goofus, sit in your chair. Lay down.
Huma knew that his strength would return the longer that they talked, while Renard's would only continue to seep away. Even now it was difficult for the other to stand. Come, nephew. Let's finish this. With amazing stamina, Renard charged Huma, attacking with a variety of moves. Huma stood his ground and slowly began to move onto the offensive. Renard's face became blurred as all was reflex, and the lessons, ironically Renard's lessons, allowed Huma to counter each and every move. A thrust broke through Renard's defenses. It caught him in his sword arm, and the traitor almost dropped his weapon as the injured limb jerked uncontrollably for a moment. He was left wide open, and Huma's blade came within an inch of his face. They were both caked in mud now. Renard had lost the madness that had possessed him, and he now seemed to realize that he had all but lost. Huma was the better than he. His eyes knew it even if his face revealed no emotion. Now it was all Renard could do not to prevent the killing blow. Huma broke through his uncle's guard again, and Renard suddenly wavered on two badly bleeding legs. He collapsed to his knees. And that broke the spell. Huma blinked, looking down at Renard, whose life fluids were mixing with the muck. A look of disgust spread across Huma's face. "It's over, Renard. I won't kill you. It served no purpose." Renard tried to stand. On one knee he waited, his sword at shoulder level, ready to defend. "I will not go back, Huma. I will not suffer the mockery of a trial." Huma lowered his sword. "Let me help you. You were a good knight, one of the best." The laugh that Renard responded with became a hacking cough. The cultist barely kept from toppling over. "Do you not understand? I've never been a knight. Since that day, my life has been in the hands of another god, and I have failed even him. Look at me!" Renard smiled feebly, and Huma was shocked to see that his former companion's pallid skin was slowly turning scarlet. "My reward for my failure. I never was truly cured, merely lived day by day." "Renard, a patrol will be by. They can locate a cleric." "No cleric will touch me." Whatever spell or nightmare the former knight had cast upon the village was gone, for now the people were screaming and crying at the sight of this, one of the worst plagues. Within seconds, the two armored knights stood alone. "Renard." It had become a strain for the other knight even to speak. The plague was coursing through his body. "Don't come near me, Huma. It spreads through the touch." Renard was smiling. "There'll be nothing left when it finishes. They'll be lucky if they find more than a shell." "Where was that patrol?" Huma scanned the horizon in frustration. "Whatever it's worth, nephew," sputtered the dying figure. "I hope that you find what you were looking for. Perhaps there is still a chance." "There!" Huma spotted distant figures on horseback. They were moving slowly. Too slowly, though. Much too slowly. "Huma." The young knight looked down, Renard's face twisted with pain. "Pray to Paladin, Renard. The patrol is nearing this village. When I explain..." "There is nothing to explain, save that they must burn my body where I lie." Renard straightened and gripped the hilt of his broadsword with both hands to steady it. With a speed that belied his sickness, Renard ran the edge of his blade across his throat. "No!" Only the realization that he would carry the plague prevented Huma from wrenching the sword from the ragged figure. It was too late already. No cleric could bind such a wound in time. Renard's limp hand released the sword, which fell and buried itself in the mud only a moment before Renard's lifeless form did the same. Huma dropped his own weapon and fell to his knees. "No." His voice was less than a whisper. Huma put his face in his hands and let his battered emotions run their course. Faintly he heard the clattering sound of many horses, and then all was silent. Ow. Ugh. Excuse me. Chapter 20. Silence. The intermingled cries of the oncoming horses and the terrified villagers who believed that the worst of the plagues had been released in their midst, the tumult of hoofbeats, even the wind, all turned to silence. The silence was interrupted by the distant beating of metal against metal. Slowly, unbelievingly, Huma raised his head from his hands and stared wide-eyed at the world around him. The weary lands outside of Vingard Keep, the entire outdoors, for that matter, were gone. What stood before him now was the mirror, the same mirror that he had fallen through days ago. Now all it revealed was the disheveled form of a worn knight who looked scarcely alive. He was back in Wormfather's cavern. Had it truly happened? It seemed unlikely at first. More conceivable that it would have been an illusion, but Huma still felt the pains that had been inflicted on him in that so-called dream. A nightmare, then. One very real nightmare. For Renard was indeed dead. Huma leaned back and removed his gauntlets. He rubbed his eyes and stared at the cursed mirror. He was both angered and relieved, angry at feeling like a puppet, relieved that he was going to be permitted to continue on his quest and perhaps reunite with Kaz and Magius. Where had they been all this time? Huma continued to stare at the mirror. The shock of Renard's betrayal and death was still with him. Renard was dead, and Huma would pray for him, but the knighthood, no, all of Ansalon, still had a chance, if what Huma had been told was truthful, that somewhere in these mountains was the key to victory. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, and Huma's mind finally registered what he was seeing. He stumbled forwards quickly. Huma had momentarily forgotten what had taken place in this chamber, what had happened to him. He had, as difficult as it was to conceive, almost forgotten the Wormfather. If time had passed here as it had at Vingard Keep, the huge form should be ripe. Carrion eaters of all shapes and sizes should have established their territories, but neither was true. The gigantic head and neck lay exactly where they had fallen, true, but Wormfather's gigantic bulk had turned to metal of the purest nature, more brilliant than silver. At the same time, it resembled that other metal more than any other. He ran his hands over it, feeling the smoothness and marveling at how great a quantity there must be. For lack of a better name, he called it dragon silver. He stumbled awkwardly around the great mass, his interest suddenly magnetized by the object that had destroyed Wormfather. Somewhere within its massive jaws, the huge corpse concealed the sword that had spoken to Huma. He was sure it had called to him, just as he was sure that he had to have it. If Huma gained nothing else from this experience, he wanted the sword. The head of the dead titan was twisted upside down, and Huma discovered that the lower jaw rested firmly atop the upper. That meant that the sword was buried within a tremendous mass of pure metal, with no way to retrieve it. Angered, Huma banged his hand against the snout of the creature. The shock brought his senses back, and he briefly wondered at his obsession with the ancient blade. Best if he kicked something with his foot. It made a metallic sound, and Huma looked down to see the very object that he had been seeking. With a startled cry, he fell to his knees and practically cradled the weapon. It was to be his. This was a sign. From the moment his hands touched it, the blade had begun to glow again. Huma basked happily in that glow, for it soothed him and made him forget the terrible events of the past few days. Reluctantly, he sheathed the sword and crawled upon the great beast. Wormfather's sloping neck proved to be an excellent ramp from which Huma could climb to one of the upper levels that dotted the cavern and seek the mysterious smith. That was, he believed, his logical destination. Neither the endless mounds of gold nor the gleaming caches of jewelry interested him, now that he had the sword. The mirror still intrigued him, but he could not carry it with him through the cavern. He consoled himself with the thought that he could return for it if he succeeded. With a proper blade in his hand for once, Huma was soon feeling rested and confident as he strode up the amazingly long neck of the Wormfather. The tunnels immediately above were naturally lit, though not to the degree that the lower ones had been. Gazing down one, Huma could see no difference between it and the passages that he had traversed originally. Dark shadows were everywhere. Emboldened now that he held a weapon worthy of him, Huma stepped off the neck of the petrified Wormfather and entered the closest tunnel. He became impatient as time dragged, and he found only more corridors. Where were the challenges? Wormfather had been one, but Huma knew that there must be two others. Still, he thought, they could not possibly compare to his brush with the huge beast. Perhaps having faced Wormfather was a test enough. One hand stroked the pommel of the sword. Maybe there was no actual need for whatever else lay within this mountain. The sword alone was worth an army, and Huma controlled the sword. His impatience grew as he continued to follow what seemed like endless tunnels. All Huma wanted to do now was leave. Challenges no longer concerned him. The blade was all that he needed. What could the cavern offer that would be a better weapon? That would better a weapon of such power and perfection. The thought of a flank under his command occurred suddenly to him. After all Huma had accomplished, Lord Oswald surely would reward him. Not only had he brought back a weapon of great value, but he had exposed Renard and saved the Elder Knight's life. A major command position had always been Huma's dream. From there, it could not be long before he would command an entire army. A smile began to spread across his face. Step no further. At first, Huma had not noticed the figure standing before him. Clad in a long, flowing cloak of gray, the figure blended in well with his surroundings, especially with the shadows now dominating. The figure's face was gray, as were his teeth and his tongue. The only noticeable change from the previous encounter with the gray man was that he was not smiling in the least this time. You again. Huma was happy to see the odd mage, if mage he was, because he could now boast something other than himself. I've beaten your challenges easily. I've come to claim my prize, not that it seems so important now. Certainly. Leave your sword where you are and walk forwards. My sword? The gray man might have asked him for his arm. Your sword. I always assumed the acoustics in here were fairly good. Am I wrong, then? At that moment, the mage's face was unreadable, as Renard's had always been. Why? Huma did not care for this suspicious move. The gray man was a servant of the Dragon Queen, after all. It must be that the gods now feared Huma's power, and why not? That thing there is not allowed within these chambers. It should not be allowed anywhere. This? The knight held aloft the magnificent sword, admiring the way it glowed so strongly. He'd thought it well made before, but the radiance of its fully awakened beauty was something to behold. Give it up? Huma would fight first. That wonderful blade you bear is known as the Sword of Tears. It's a relic from the Age of Dreams. Through it, Takhisis seduced the ogre race, twisted them from beauty, until all but a handful strayed from the path. It is said to be the weapon with which the champion of darkness will challenge the light on the final battle before the last day. It is pure evil and should be banished, if there is any true choice. You're wrong. This is the key to our victory. Look at it! The gray man shaded his eyes. I have, many times. Its wicked travesty of illumination still irritates after all of these centuries. Huma lowered the blade, but only so that he could point it towards the man barring his way. Is it that? Or are you one who shuns the light in general? I think it is you who are the danger. If you could only see your face. My face? The Sword of Tears, you say? Could it actually be called that because the tears of the Dragon Queen will shed when at last faced with a power stronger than she? The gray man's face screwed into an expression of disgust. I see the hard blade has not lost any of its charm. Holding his sword possessively, Huma folded his arms. I've listened to your little tirade long enough. Now will you let me pass? The guardian brought his staff up to eye level. Not with the sword. Huma only smiled and thrust the sword into the rocky wall to his left. The blade sank in as if the tunnel were made of curdled milk rather than stone, and the weapon flared with emerald light. With similar ease, the knight drew it out. The blade looked unscratched, while that portion of the wall had lost its natural glow. The gray man only curled his lip and said mockingly, You'd better strike it again. It may still have some fight left in it. Huma glared at him. Your last chance. Will you yield? Not unless the sword is forfeited. Then I shall slice a path through your body. If you can. Huma raised the Sword of Tears, which seemed to glow more brilliantly, as if in anticipation, and stepped forwards. The gray man stepped out of his defensive position and threw his staff on the tunnel floor. Huma stood there, arm raised, momentarily stunned. Have you surrendered, then? The hooded figure shook his head. If you would continue, you must strike me down. Strike him down! A voice shouted in Huma's mind. The green glow of the Sword of Tears dominated the tunnel now. Strike him down! The voice repeated. This is... Huma struggled to complete the thought. The voice became insistent. Strike him down and gain your prize! Wrong! Give up the sword, Huma. Only then will you be free. No! The sword issued from the knight's mouth. The word issued from the knight's mouth, but it was not he who had spoken. Instead, the source seemed to have been the blade itself, which now caused Huma's arm to rise as if he were intending to smite the gray mage. No! This time it was Huma who spoke. He He collapsed against the side of the passageway and regarded with sudden disgust and horror the thing that he held in his hand, despite the brilliance that had caused even the gray man to turn away. "Take me! Wield me! I was meant to glory in blood! I was meant to rend the world from my mistress!" "No!" The denial came more firmly now as the shock in Huma's eyes gave way to anger. He had torn free from the malevolent artifact's spell. The blade had asked the impossible of him, to purposefully strike down one who neither deserved it nor sought to defend himself. Huma had not been able to do so with Renard, and he could not do so with the dun-colored guardian. I think we're going to need a cough drop after this. My throat is feeling weird. Power surged from the sword, and Huma screamed. The shockwaves threw the knight to the floor. He felt as if every fiber of his body were being torn apart. He could see only green. He could feel only pain. He could hear only the incessant command of the sword of tears as it sought to overcome his will. "Huma!" Another voice, familiar, sought to assert its influence on him. He took the lifeline and concentrated. "You must be willing to part from it, totally, or the demon sword will have your body and your soul." Totally. Huma struggled against the pain. He saw now that the Sword of Tears worked only for its own wily purposes, and would never truly be anyone's servant. That realization gave Huma the willpower that he had lacked. "I deny you!" He held the sword at arm's length, sickened by it. "I will have no part of you, and therefore you have no power over me!" The pain diminished, and Huma pressed the advantage. Slowly he forced the outside presence from his head, reviling it, confident now that it had no true power. The presence seemed to shrink back from his determination, and the emerald brilliance diminished dramatically. "Master," it called, "you are truly master!" It cowed before his mind. Huma's confidence grew until a thought flashed through his head. Now that he had defeated it, could he not use it safely? "No!" Huma pushed the thought away. Sweat dripped from his forehead. His skin had gone white. Huma threw the demonic blade wildly across the corridor. As he did, he thought he heard or felt a maddened cry. The sword clattered against the opposite wall and dropped to the ground. The glow had all but vanished. "Never!" Huma panted. He leaned against the wall, his hands on his knees. Not for all the power in the world. Slow footsteps indicated the near presence of the gray man. A strong hand fell on Huma's shoulder. "There's no more reason to fear. The Sword of Tears is nothing. No more than smoke in the wind. See?" Huma looked up. The demon sword was wavering and beginning to fade, to sink through the stone to nothingness. Within seconds, there was no trace of its physical form nor the sinister presence within. "Where is it?" "Hopefully back where it belongs. The thing has a mind of its own, but you know that. I think I've put it in a place where it will take some doing for it to break free." I'm sorry. I'm probably going to sound weird for a bit, but I need a cough drop. The knight looked up. You saved me. And my soul." "I?" The gray man looked slightly amused. "I did nothing but make a few friendly suggestions. It was you who had to face the real battle. You persevered, though." "What happens now?" Huma stood slowly. His body ached. His head ached. He did not think that he was capable of anything just yet. Huma slumped against the wall. "Now?" The gray man sounded amused. Huma could not see what was so funny. "Now, you step through and claim your prize. You have defeated all 3 challenges." Defeated? The knight shook his head sadly. "You're mistaken. I barely escaped with my life, much less my soul." "You live, yes. That is the purpose of everything. To strive for life, for purpose." "Wormfather, the Sword of Tears, that makes only 2 challenges, unless..." The truth struck Huma forcefully. The gray man smiled a sad, gray smile. "Your trip through the mirror was no accident. A dark stain had spread itself deep within the fabric of the knighthood, and who better to cleanse the knighthood of that foulness than one of its own? Most, I think, would have been pleased to slay Renard without permitting him a chance to surrender. You wanted to save him even then. That the passion for life is what the knighthood truly strives for, above all else. Huma straightened, stared at the seemingly endless tunnel behind the grey man, and then turned back to the hooded figure. Are you Paladin? The grey mage smiled mischievously and tapped the side of his nose.
Could say that I am, but I won't. Let's just say that the balance between good and evil must be maintained, and I am one of the chosen to see to it. Much like yourself, though I fear my part is small compared to your own.
He gave Huma no opportunity to reply.
It's time you went through this last tunnel and claimed your reward. As I said before, you must go weaponless. Weaponless, save your faith.
As Huma stared, the grey man raised his hand, which held 2 daggers gingerly by the tips. Huma reached instinctively to his own belt, but his daggers were gone. They belonged to the grey man now. Only the grey man was gone too. Only the gaping tunnel stood before Huma. He took a step towards the darkened passageway. Huma said 2 prayers, one to Paladin and the second to Gileon, Lord of Neutrality, and walked into the darkness. Huma could not judge time, but he was sure that he had been walking for a long period when the first echoes of the hammer reached him. They seemed neither far nor near, and the intensity never changed. It was not as it had been in the great chamber, where the towering, maddened Leviathan had shrieked out such a torment. Rather, the familiar sounds of a smith at work put the knight at ease, as he had recalled a point in his training where he was taught the basics of the trade. All knights had some knowledge of the craft, for each might be called upon to mend armor or shoe a horse. A good smith, as the knighthood dictated, could do virtually anything with an anvil, a hammer, and a fire-red metal. Whoever worked at the anvil had to be a mighty man, Huma decided, for the fall of the hammer went on with such regular rhythm and for such a great length of time that most men would have fallen to their knees by now. At that, who said it must be a man? Might it not be Reorx himself? Here, he knew, was a place of gods and power. Anything might lie ahead. Then, when he had not noticed it somehow, Huma found himself standing in the massive armory. Countless implements of war and peace hung, stood, or lay from wall to wall, as far as he could see in the dim light, and even from the ceiling high above. A sickle whose blade, if straightened, would be at least the length of Huma's body. Swords of all shapes and sizes, some curved, some straight, some thin, and some heavy, jeweled and plain, one-handed and two-handed. Here he saw even more suits of armor than in the chambers below. The suits ranged from the most primitive breastplates to the latest full armor as worn by the Argothian emperor. Shields hung above the suits representing every crest ever created, including that of the Knights of Salonia. There was so much more, and Huma longed to see all of it. He felt as if he had stepped into the long-lost tomb of some great warrior. Yet this was no lost resting place of the dead, for the weaponry and artifacts were devoid of dust or any sign of age. Each piece he inspected might have been made only yesterday, so sharp were the edges and smooth were the sides. No rust infected the armor. The wooden handles of the sickle had not rotted. Huma knew, however, that these creations were older than the chambers below, that before all else in this mountain maze, this set of chambers had been first. He could not say how he knew, just that he knew. The fall of the hammer had become a pattern in his ears, and he did not notice at first when it stopped. When he did, he had already wandered midway through the armory, his gaze flickering back and forth. Huma paused then, momentarily unsure. It was at that moment that he saw the flicker of light from ahead, and heard the unknown smith resume his work. Only 2 massive doors barred his way. Huma reached forwards to knock upon one of the doors, even as it swung open. The slight movement was accompanied by a tremendous squeak, and it amazed the knight that the hammer kept falling as if its wielder had heard nothing nor did not care. It was a smithy of godlike proportions, a huge tank of water that could only be for cooling the product, a massive forge where Huma had to squint. Shadowy figures stoked the furnace with might and gusto. The hammering ceased with finality.
He wrenched his eyes from the sun-hot forge and turned. The anvil stood as high as Huma's waist, and would have weighed half a dozen times his weight in full armor. The soot-covered figure that stood beside it, a two-handed hammer held easily in one hand and raised high above his head, turned to study the newcomer. The figures at the forge ceased their activity, as did two others near the anvil. The smith lowered his arm and stepped forwards. Huma's eyes did not go immediately to the face, but were riveted instead by the arm. It was metal, a metal that gleamed like the material that Wormfather had become. Then Huma looked into the face of the smith. Like the body, it was soot-covered, but Huma could see that the smith claimed no one race as his own, for the features were a blend of elf, human, dwarf, and something unidentifiable. The smith studied him from head to toe and, in a voice surprisingly quiet, asked, "Have you come at last for the Dragonlance?" So, with that, my voice is not feeling great, so I'm going to call it a night. Just remember that when everything else seems lost and everything is falling apart around you, when it's hardest and darkest and you don't know what to do, hope is always a choice. And it might be a hard choice. It might be the most difficult choice in your entire life. But hope is a choice, and it is what drives us forwards. And ultimately, it's hope for a better day. So, in the meantime, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing a thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. Take good care of yourself.